The Tulsa Race Massacre, also known as the Tulsa Race Riot or the Black Wall Street Massacre, was a two-day-long white supremacist terrorist attack that occurred from May 31 to June 1, 1921. During this time, mobs of white residents, some deputized and armed by city officials, attacked black residents and destroyed homes and businesses in the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma. This event is considered one of the worst incidents of racial violence in American history. The attackers burned and destroyed more than 35 square blocks of the neighborhood, which was then one of the wealthiest black communities in the United States, known as Black Wall Street. More than 800 people were admitted to hospitals, and up to 6,000 black residents of Tulsa were interned in large facilities, many for several days. The Oklahoma Bureau of Vital Statistics officially recorded 36 deaths. A 2001 examination by the Tulsa Reparations Coalition identified 39 deaths, 26 black and 13 white, based on autopsy reports, death certificates, and other records. The commission estimated the death toll to be between 75 and 300. The massacre began over Memorial Day weekend after 19-year-old Dick Rowland, a black shoeshiner, was accused of assaulting Sarah Page, a 17-year-old white elevator operator in the nearby Drexel building. He was arrested, and rumors of a planned lynching spread throughout the city, which had seen the lynching of a white man named Roy Belton the previous year. Upon hearing that a mob of hundreds of white men had gathered around the jail where Rowland was held, a group of 75 black men, some armed, went to the jail to protect him. The sheriff persuaded the group to leave, assuring them he had the situation under control. The most widely reported and corroborated incident that sparked the violence occurred as a group of black men were leaving. An elderly white man approached O.B. Mann, a black man, and demanded he hand over his pistol. Mann refused, and the old man attempted to disarm him. A gunshot went off, and according to the sheriff's reports, all hell broke loose. The two groups exchanged gunfire until midnight when the outnumbered black men were forced to retreat to Greenwood. By the end of the exchange, 12 people were dead, 10 white and 2 black. An alternative eyewitness account stated that the shooting began down the street from the courthouse, when black business owners defended a lone black man being attacked by a group of around 6 white men. This eyewitness may not have realized that this incident was part of a rolling gunfight already underway. As news of the violence spread throughout the city, mob violence exploded. White rioters invaded Greenwood that night and the next morning, killing residents and burning and looting stores and homes. Around noon on June 1, the Oklahoma National Guard imposed martial law, ending the massacre. Approximately 10,000 black people were left homeless, and the property damage amounted to more than $1.5 million in real estate and $750,000 in personal property, equivalent to $38.43 million in 2023. By the end of 1922, most residences' homes had been rebuilt, but the city and real estate companies refused to compensate them. Many survivors left Tulsa, while those who remained, regardless of race, largely kept silent about the terror, violence, and losses for decades. The massacre was largely omitted from local, state, and national histories for years. In 1996, 75 years after the massacre, a bipartisan group in the state legislature authorized the formation of the Oklahoma Commission to study the Tulsa Race Riot of 1921. The commission's final report, published in 2001, stated that the city had conspired with the racist mob and recommended a program of reparations for survivors and their descendants. Following this, the state passed legislation to establish scholarships for the descendants of survivors, encourage the economic development of Greenwood, and develop a park in memory of the victims of the massacre in Tulsa. The park was dedicated in 2010. Since 2002, schools in Oklahoma have been required to teach students about the massacre, and in 2020, the massacre officially became part of the Oklahoma school curriculum. In 1921, Oklahoma was characterized by a racially, socially, and politically tense atmosphere. The northern part of Oklahoma had been established for the forced resettlement of Native Americans from the southeast, some of whom had owned slaves. These slaves were the first black inhabitants of Indian Territory, brought by their Native American owners. Additionally, other areas in Oklahoma saw an influx of settlers from the south, whose families had been slaveholders before the Civil War. Oklahoma was admitted as a state on November 16, 1907. The newly created state legislature, with a large Democratic majority, quickly passed racial segregation laws, commonly known as Jim Crow laws, as its first order of business. Although the 1907 Oklahoma Constitution did not mandate strict segregation due to fears that President Theodore Roosevelt would veto it, the first law passed by the new legislature segregated all rail travel and voter registration rules effectively disenfranchised non-whites. Consequently, non-whites were barred from serving on juries or holding local public offices. These laws remained in force until they were declared unconstitutional following the passage of the Federal Voting Rights Act of 1965. Major cities passed additional restrictive laws. On August 4, 1916, Tulsa passed an ordinance mandating residential segregation by forbidding members of either race from living on any block where 3/4 or more of the residents were members of the other race. Although the United States Supreme Court declared such ordinances unconstitutional the following year, Tulsa and many other cities continued to enforce segregation for the next 3 decades. Following the end of World War I in 1918, many servicemen returned to Tulsa. As they re-entered the labor force, social tensions and white supremacist sentiment increased in cities where job competition was fierce. An economic slump in northeastern Oklahoma exacerbated unemployment levels. The Civil War, which ended in 1865, was still within living memory, and civil rights for African Americans were severely lacking. The Ku Klux Klan experienced a resurgence, influenced by the popular 1915 film The Birth of a Nation. Since 1915, the Klan had been growing in urban chapters across the country, making its first significant appearance in Oklahoma on August 12, 1921. By the end of that year, an estimated 3,200 of Tulsa's 72,000 residents were Klan members. In the early 20th century, lynchings were common in Oklahoma as part of a continued effort to assert and maintain white supremacy. By 1921, at least 31 people, mostly black men and boys, had been lynched in the newly formed state. 26 were black. At the same time, black veterans pushed for their civil rights to be enforced, believing that their military service had earned them full citizenship. The Red Summer of 1919 saw severe race riots in industrial cities across the Midwest and Northeast, where whites attacked black communities, often with the assistance of local authorities. Tulsa, a booming oil city, supported a large number of affluent, educated, and professional African American residents. The Greenwood District, organized in 1906 after Booker T. Washington's 1905 tour of Arkansas, Indian Territory, and Oklahoma, became known as the Negro Wall Street, now commonly referred to as the Black Wall Street. Most black residents lived together in this district, which was a namesake of the Greenwood District that Washington had established in Tuskegee, Alabama, 5 years earlier. Greenwood was so prosperous that it featured numerous black-owned businesses and services, including several grocers, 2 newspapers, 2 movie theaters, nightclubs, and numerous churches. Black professionals, including doctors, dentists, lawyers, and clergy, served the community. During his 1905 trip to Tulsa, Washington encouraged the cooperation, economic independence, and excellence being demonstrated there. Greenwood residents selected their own leaders and raised capital to support economic growth. In the surrounding areas of northeastern Oklahoma, they also enjoyed relative prosperity and participated in the oil boom. On May 30, 1921, 19-year-old Dick Rowland, a black shoeshiner employed at a Main Street shine parlor, entered the only elevator in the nearby Drexel building at 319 South Main Street to use the top-floor, colored restroom, which his employer had arranged for his black employees. There, he encountered Sarah Page, the 17-year-old white elevator operator on duty. The extent of their acquaintance is unclear, but they likely recognized each other since Rowland would have regularly used Page's elevator to access the restroom. A clerk at Renberg's, a clothing store on the first floor of the Drexel, heard what sounded like a woman's scream and saw a young black man rushing from the building. The clerk found Page in a distraught state in the elevator and, assuming she had been sexually assaulted, called the authorities. Various explanations have been given for the incident. The most common explanation is that Rowland tripped while entering the elevator and, in trying to catch his fall, grabbed Page's arm, causing her to scream. Other suggestions include the possibility of a lover's quarrel between Rowland and Page. The 2001 Oklahoma Commission final report notes that it was unusual for both Rowland and Page to be working downtown on Memorial Day when most stores and businesses were closed. It is speculated that Rowland was there because the shine parlor where he worked may have been open to attract parade traffic, while Page was working to transport Drexel building employees and their families to prime parade viewing spots on the building's upper floors. Although the police questioned Page, no written account of her statement has been found. Apparently, she told the police that Rowland had grabbed her arm and nothing more, and she did not press charges. The police concluded that the incident was less than an assault and conducted a low-key investigation rather than launching a manhunt for Rowland. Regardless of whether an assault had occurred, Rowland had reason to be fearful, as African American men accused of raping white women were often prime targets for lynch mobs. Understanding the gravity of the situation, Rowland fled to his mother's house in the Greenwood neighborhood. On the morning after the incident, Henry Carmichael, a white detective, and Henry Seapack, a black patrolman, found Rowland on Greenwood Avenue and detained him. Rowland was initially taken to the Tulsa City Jail at the corner of 1st Street and Main Street. Later that day, Police Commissioner J.M. Adkisson received an anonymous telephone call threatening Rowland's life and ordered his transfer to the more secure jail on the top floor of the Tulsa County Courthouse. Rowland was well known among attorneys and other legal professionals in the city through his work as a shoeshiner. Some witnesses later recounted hearing several attorneys defend Rowland in their conversations with one another. One of them said, "Why, I know that boy, and have known him a good while. That's not in him." The Tulsa Tribune, owned, published, and edited by Richard Lloyd Jones, was one of two white-owned papers in Tulsa and broke the story in its afternoon edition with the headline, "Nab Negro for Attacking Girl in an Elevator," detailing the alleged incident. Some witnesses claimed that the same edition included an editorial warning of a potential lynching of Rowland titled, "To Lynch Negro Tonight." Known for its sensationalist style of newswriting at the time, all original copies of that particular issue of the paper are said to have been destroyed, and the relevant page is missing from the microfilm copy. Despite a reward offered by the Tulsa Race Riot Commission in 1997 for a copy of the editorial, none was found. A copy of the June 1, 1921, issue of the Tulsa Tribune was discovered, featuring an article on the front page titled, "Nab Negro for Attacking Girl in an Elevator." However, the editorial page did not contain an article titled, "To Lynch a Negro Tonight." Other newspapers of the time, such as the Black Dispatch and the Tulsa World, did not report on such an editorial after the event. Therefore, the exact content of the column, and its existence at all, remains disputed. Chief of Detectives James Patton attributed the cause of the riots solely to the newspaper account, stating, "If the facts in the story as told to the police had only been printed, I do not think there would have been any riot whatsoever." The Tribune's afternoon edition hit the streets shortly after 3 p.m., spreading news of a potential lynching. By 4 p.m., local authorities were on alert, and white residents began gathering at and near the Tulsa County Courthouse. By sunset, around 7:30 p.m., several hundred white residents assembled outside the courthouse, forming what appeared to be a lynch mob. Willard M. McCullough, the newly elected sheriff of Tulsa County, was determined to prevent a repeat of the 1920 lynching of Roy Belton, a white murder suspect, during his predecessor's term. Taking action to protect Rowland, the sheriff organized his deputies defensively around him. Reports from the Guthrie Daily Leader indicated Rowland had been taken to the county jail before the crowds began to gather. Sheriff McCullough stationed 6 armed deputies on the courthouse roof with rifles and shotguns, disabled the elevator, and barricaded the remaining deputies at the top of the stairs with orders to shoot any intruders. Despite the sheriff's attempts to disperse the crowd, recounted by Scott Ellsworth, he was hooted down. Around 8:20 p.m., 3 white men entered the courthouse demanding Rowland be handed over, but Sheriff McCullough, vastly outnumbered, turned them away. A few blocks away on Greenwood Avenue, the black community gathered at Gurley's Hotel to discuss the escalating situation. Fearful of Rowland facing a similar fate to Belton's recent lynching, tensions among black residents were high. While many were prepared to defend Rowland, there were divisions over tactics. Young World War I veterans armed themselves, while older, more prosperous men feared the potential for destructive conflict. O.W. Gurley attempted to reassure the gathering that there would be no lynching, but the crowd insisted they were summoned by Sheriff McCullough himself. Around 9:30 p.m., approximately 50 to 60 armed black men arrived at the jail to support Sheriff McCullough and his deputies in protecting Rowland from the mob. Despite later claims, Sheriff McCullough publicly denied giving any orders for their assistance.
"I saw a car full of Negroes driving through the streets with guns. I saw Bill McCullough and told him those Negroes would cause trouble. McCullough tried to talk to them, and they got out and stood in single file. W.G. Daggs was killed near Boulder and 6th Street. I was under the impression that a man with authority could have stopped and disarmed them. I saw the chief of police on the south side of the courthouse on the top step, talking. I did not see any officer except the chief. I walked into the courthouse and met McCullough about 15 feet from his door. I told him these Negroes were going to make trouble, and he said he had told them to go home. He went out and told the whites to go home, and one said, 'They said you told them to come up here.' McCullough said, 'I did not,' and a Negro said, 'You did tell us to come.'"
Upon seeing the armed black men, some of the more than 1,000 white individuals who had gathered at the courthouse went home to retrieve their own firearms. Others headed towards the National Guard Armory at 6th Street and Norfolk Avenue, intending to arm themselves from the armory's supply of small arms and ammunition. Major James Bell of the 180th Infantry Regiment was informed about the escalating situation downtown and the potential for a break-in at the armory. Taking preemptive action, Bell contacted the commanders of all 3 National Guard units in Tulsa, ordering them to don their uniforms and quickly report to the armory. When a group of whites attempted to pull at the grating over a window at the armory, Bell stepped outside to confront the crowd of 300 to 400 men. He warned them that the guard members inside were armed and prepared to shoot anyone attempting to enter. Following this display of readiness, the crowd retreated from the armory. Meanwhile, at the courthouse, the crowd had swelled to nearly 2,000, with many now armed. Several local leaders, including Reverend Charles W. Kerr of the First Presbyterian Church, attempted to dissuade mob action. Chief of Police John A. Gustafson later stated he had tried to convince the crowd to disperse. Tensions mounted on Greenwood Avenue, where many black residents feared for Roland's safety. Small groups of armed black men drove towards the courthouse, partly for surveillance and to demonstrate their readiness to protect Roland. These actions were perceived by many white observers as a Negro uprising, heightening their anxiety. Eyewitnesses reported hearing gunshots, presumably fired into the air, increasing in frequency throughout the evening. In Greenwood, rumors circulated, including reports of a white attack on the courthouse. Just after 10 p.m., a larger group of approximately 75 armed black men decided to head towards the courthouse to offer their support to the sheriff, who ultimately declined their assistance. There are conflicting reports about the exact time and nature of the incidents that immediately precipitated the massacre. According to the 2001 commission, as black men were leaving, a white man attempted to disarm a tall, African-American World War I veteran. A struggle ensued, and a shot rang out. Sheriff reports indicate that all hell broke loose after this exchange of gunfire, resulting in 12 fatalities, 10 white and 2 black. Another first-hand account comes from Eloise Taylor Butler, who was 19 years old and in Greenwood that day. According to her great-granddaughter, who relayed Eloise's story, the initial incident did not start at the courthouse but escalated there. It reportedly began down the street from the courthouse, where approximately 6 white men attacked a lone black man. Black store owners came out from nearby shops to defend him, resulting in gunfire. The account states that the black owners fought back as best they could, but the white mob retaliated by setting fire to the shops in that area right from the start. The 2001 commission notes that African American homes and businesses along Archer Street were among the first targets of the arson. These shops down the street from the courthouse, where the initial incident occurred, likely served as immediate targets for the white mob's aggression. Whether they were chosen first out of convenience or due to specific motives remains uncertain. While the Taylor account insists this incident happened before the initial gunfight at the courthouse and then escalated there, it's plausible that this incident was part of the broader rolling gunfight that spread across Tulsa's streets after the first reported exchange of gunfire. Gunshots rang out, triggering an immediate response as both sides opened fire. The initial skirmish was brief but deadly, leaving 10 white men and 2 black men dead or mortally wounded in the street. The black men who had offered to protect their community retreated toward Greenwood as a rolling gunfight ensued. The armed white mob pursued them, looting local stores for more weapons and ammunition along the way. Amid the chaos, bystanders leaving a nearby movie theater were caught off guard and fled in panic. The white mob, in their pursuit, began indiscriminately firing on any black individuals in the crowd. In the confusion, at least 1 white man was mistakenly killed by the mob. According to the Oklahoma Historical Society, some in the mob were deputized by a police officer and instructed with the chilling directive to get a gun and get a nigger. Thus began a brutal assault on the African American community. Around 11 p.m., National Guard units started gathering at the armory to formulate a strategy to quell the violence. Various groups were dispatched downtown to secure the courthouse, police station, and other public buildings. Local American Legion members joined in patrolling the streets. These deployments seemed focused on protecting adjacent white neighborhoods from the chaos. Meanwhile, the National Guard rounded up numerous black individuals, detaining them at the convention hall on Brady Street. Shortly before midnight, a small group of whites congregated outside the courthouse, shouting threats and demanding Roland's lynching, but they did not attempt to storm the building. Throughout the early morning hours, armed white and black groups engaged in gunfights concentrated along the Frisco tracks, which divided the black and white commercial districts. A rumor circulated that additional black individuals were arriving by train from Muskogee to assist in a Tulsa invasion. Passengers on an incoming train found themselves caught in crossfire, forced to take cover on the train floor as shots struck the train from both sides. Small groups of white men made brief incursions into Greenwood by car, firing indiscriminately at businesses and homes, often met with return gunfire. Concurrently, white rioters hurled lit oil rags into buildings along Archer Street, setting them ablaze. As unrest spread across the city, middle-class white families employing black individuals as live-in cooks and servants faced harassment from white rioters. The rioters demanded these families surrender their employees to be taken to various detention centers throughout Tulsa. Many families complied under duress, but those who resisted faced retaliatory attacks and vandalism. Around 1 a.m., the white mob initiated arson, primarily targeting businesses along Commercial Archer Street at the southern perimeter of the Greenwood district. As word spread among Greenwood residents in the early morning hours, many armed themselves in defense of their neighborhood, while others began evacuating the city en masse. Throughout the night, sporadic fighting continued between the opposing factions. When crews from the Tulsa Fire Department arrived to extinguish fires, they were reportedly turned away at gunpoint, as noted by Scott Ellsworth, although his account does not specifically mention firefighters. Mary E. Jones Parrish, a survivor of the massacre, praised the National Guard for their efforts. Another reference cited by Ellsworth supports claims of firefighters being held at gunpoint, stating they were fired upon by the white mob. It would mean a fireman's life to turn a stream of water on one of those Negro buildings. By 4 a.m., an estimated 24 black-owned businesses had been set ablaze. W. Tate Brady, a co-founder of Tulsa and member of the Ku Klux Klan, participated in the riot as a night watchman. This land press previously reported that Brady had led the Tulsa outrage in 1917, involving the tarring and feathering of industrial workers of the World members, an incident viewed as economically and politically motivated rather than racially. At sunrise around 5 a.m., a train whistle sounded, referred to as a siren by some accounts. Some rioters interpreted this sound as a signal to launch a full-scale assault on Greenwood. A white man emerged from behind the Frisco depot and was fatally shot by a sniper from Greenwood. Rioters emerged from their positions, on foot and in cars, flooding into the neighborhood streets. 5 white men led the charge in a car but were met with a barrage of gunfire, killing them before they traveled a single block. Facing overwhelming numbers, black residents retreated north along Greenwood Avenue toward the outskirts of town. Chaos ensued as terrified residents fled. Rioters fired indiscriminately, resulting in numerous casualties along the way. Breaking into smaller groups, they began looting houses and buildings. Several witnesses later testified that rioters forcibly entered occupied homes, ordering residents into the streets where they were either driven or forced to walk to detention centers. A rumor circulated among rioters that the newly built Mount Zion Baptist Church served as a fortress and armory, allegedly housing 20 caskets filled with rifles, though no evidence of such was found. Numerous eyewitnesses recounted seeing airplanes carrying white assailants who fired rifles and dropped firebombs on buildings, homes, and fleeing families. These privately owned aircraft had been dispatched from the nearby Curtis Southwest Field outside Tulsa. Law enforcement officials later claimed the planes were sent for reconnaissance and to prevent a Negro uprising, with some reports suggesting law enforcement personnel were aboard some flights. Eyewitness testimony during commission hearings and a manuscript by attorney Buck Colbert Franklin, discovered in 2015, described how on the morning of June 1, at least a dozen or more planes circled the neighborhood and dropped burning turpentine balls on various buildings, including an office building, a hotel, a filling station, and others. Men also fired rifles at black residents, killing them in the streets. Richard S. Warner, in his submission to the Oklahoma Commission, challenged later reports of explosions, stating there was no reliable evidence to support such attacks. Warner noted discrepancies in reports, citing that while newspapers aimed at black readers heavily reported the use of nitroglycerin, turpentine, and rifles from planes, many sources were anonymous or secondhand. Beryl Ford, a prominent historian of the disaster, corroborated Warner's findings, concluding from his extensive photo collection that there was no evidence of buildings damaged by explosions. Danny Goebel supported Warner's conclusions, while State Representative Don Ross, dissenting from the report, argued that bombs were indeed dropped from planes during the violence. In 2015, the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture obtained a previously unknown eyewitness account written by Buck Colbert Franklin, a notable Oklahoma attorney and father of John Hope Franklin, detailing the events of May 31, 1921. Here are the notable quotes. Lurid flames roared and belched, licking their forked tongues into the air. Thick, black volumes of smoke ascended into the sky, while the planes, now a dozen or more, hummed and darted with the agility of birds. Planes circled overhead, their numbers growing as they hummed, darted, and dipped low. I heard what sounded like hail falling on the roof of my office building. Down East Archer, I witnessed the old Midway Hotel ablaze from its top, followed by another and another building igniting from their upper floors. The sidewalks were strewn with burning turpentine balls. I knew their origin and understood why each burning building started at its highest point. I paused, waiting for an opportunity to escape. Where is our splendid fire department with its half-dozen stations? I wondered, is the city complicit with the mob? Franklin observed multiple machine guns firing at night and heard thousands and thousands of guns discharging from all directions simultaneously. He recounted being apprehended by what felt like 1,000 boys, firing their guns with each step they took. Adjutant General Charles F. Barrett of the Oklahoma National Guard arrived by special train around 9:15 a.m., accompanied by 109 troops from Oklahoma City. Upon arrival, he was required by law to coordinate with local authorities including Mayor T.D. Evans, the sheriff, and the police chief before taking action. Meanwhile, his troops took a break to have breakfast. Barrett called for reinforcements from several other Oklahoma cities. Martial law was declared at 11:49 a.m., and by noon, the troops had largely quelled the remaining violence. In the aftermath, thousands of black residents had fled the city, and around 4,000 people were detained at various centers. Under martial law, detainees were mandated to carry identification cards. Up to 6,000 residents from Greenwood were interned at 3 local facilities: Convention Hall, now Tulsa Theater, the Tulsa County Fairgrounds, about a mile northeast of Greenwood at the time, and McNulty Park, a baseball stadium at 10th Street and Elgin Avenue. A letter from an officer of the service company, 3rd Infantry, Oklahoma National Guard, dated May 31, 1921, detailed various actions during the riot suppression. Detaining approximately 30 to 40 black residents. Attempting to patrol with a machine gun mounted on a truck, though it was non-functional and less effective than a rifle. Exchanging fire with black snipers reportedly from a church, and returning fire. Engaging in firefights with white men. Handing over prisoners to deputies for transport to police headquarters. Sustaining minor injuries to 2 NCOs in a firefight with armed black residents. Conducting searches for snipers and firearms. Assigning an NCO to escort 170 black residents to civil authorities. Transporting an additional 150 black residents to Convention Hall. Captain John W. McCune reported instances where stored ammunition in burning structures exploded, potentially causing additional casualties. Martial law was lifted on June 4 under Field Order No. 7. The Tulsa Massacre received widespread coverage in national newspapers, but the reported death toll varied significantly. On June 1, 1921, the Tulsa Tribune initially reported 9 white and 68 black deaths, later revising it to 176 deaths in total. The following day, they revised it again to 9 white and 21 black deaths. The Los Angeles Express headline stated, 175 killed, many wounded. The New York Times first reported 77 deaths, including 68 black victims, later reducing it to 33 deaths total. The Richmond Times-Dispatch reported 85 deaths, including 25 white victims, with the police chief initially reporting 75 deaths and a police major suggesting 175. Official records from the Oklahoma Department of Vital Statistics documented 36 deaths, 26 black and 10 white, with very few attributed directly to fire-related causes. State records indicate only 5 fire-related deaths for the entire state in 1921. Walter Francis White of the NAACP visited Tulsa and reported discrepancies, stating officials and undertakers claimed 10 white and 21 black deaths, but estimating 50 white and between 150 to 200 black deaths. He noted additional deaths, such as 6 white men who entered the black section and never returned, and 13 whites killed on subsequent days. Major O.T. Johnson of the Salvation Army reported overseeing the burial of 120 blacks in individual graves without coffins over Friday and Saturday, with ground-penetrating radar later used to investigate these purported mass grave sites. No evidence of mass graves was found, though disturbances suggesting graves were found at one site where cemetery records indicated 3 graves had been dug before the riot. The Oklahoma 2001 Commission provided conflicting estimates, with Goebel estimating 100 to 300 deaths, Franklin and Ellsworth suggesting 75 to 100 deaths, doubting higher estimates and validating lower ones. C. Snow confirmed 39 casualties, all male, with 26 black and 13 white victims. 13 white fatalities were taken to hospitals, mostly from outside Oklahoma and likely petroleum industry workers. Only 8 of the 26 confirmed black fatalities were taken to hospitals. Due to segregation and the burning of Frisell Memorial Hospital, Injured blacks were treated at Morningside Hospital's basement, where several hundred were also injured. The Red Cross, in its initial assessment, noted widely varying external estimates of deaths ranging from 55 to 300. However, due to the hastily conducted and undocumented burials, they refrained from providing an official death toll, stating, "The number of dead remains speculative." The Red Cross registered 8,624 individuals affected by the massacre. Among them, 183 were hospitalized, primarily for gunshot wounds or burns, categorized by triage urgency rather than wound type, and an additional 531 required first aid or surgical treatment. 8 miscarriages were attributed to the tragedy, and 19 individuals died in care between June 1 and December 30, 1921. In Greenwood, nearly 10,000 people relied heavily on Red Cross relief efforts. The organization played a crucial role in planning and implementing a comprehensive recovery plan, which included security, food, shelter, job training, healthcare, and legal support for survivors. The Red Cross characterized the victims as resembling prisoners of war, displaced and vulnerable, abandoned by their government, confined to specific areas, denied basic rights, and stripped of their belongings. Within a year of arriving in Tulsa, the Red Cross established Oklahoma's first hospital for black patients and conducted mass vaccinations to prevent the spread of diseases in survivor camps. They also built infrastructure to ensure access to clean water, sufficient food, and adequate housing for those displaced by the massacre. The business district of Greenwood suffered complete destruction. The losses included 191 businesses, a junior high school, several churches, and the district's only hospital. According to the Red Cross, 1,256 houses were burned down, and an additional 215 were looted but not set on fire. The Tulsa Real Estate Exchange estimated property damages at approximately $1.5 million in real estate and $750,000 in personal property, which would equate to a total of $38 million in 2023. By December 1921, the Red Cross estimated that 10,000 people had been left homeless as a result of the devastation. Over the following year, local residents filed claims totaling more than $1.8 million, equivalent to $31 million in 2023, related to the riot against the city. On June 3, the Morning Tulsa Daily World published key points from their interview with Deputy Sheriff Barney Cleaver regarding the events leading up to the Tulsa riot. Cleaver, a deputy sheriff for Okmulgee County and not under the city police department's jurisdiction, was primarily responsible for enforcing the law in Greenwood among the African American community. Additionally, he operated as a private investigator. He had previously been dismissed from his role as a city police investigator for participating in a drug raid at Gurley's Hotel without reporting it to his superiors. Cleaver, who owned substantial landholdings, suffered significant financial losses due to the riot, including several residential properties and Cleaver Hall, a large community gathering place. Cleaver reported personally evicting armed criminals who had barricaded themselves in his properties, only for them to relocate to Cleaver Hall after being expelled. According to the Morning Tulsa Daily World, Cleaver identified Will Robinson, described as a drug peddler and troublemaker, as the leader of the armed African Americans. Cleaver also provided names of 3 others who were part of the armed group at the courthouse. He characterized the remaining participants in the violence as former servicemen with inflated egos who lacked steady employment and seemed bent on causing unrest. O.W. Gurley, owner of Gurley's Hotel, confirmed that individuals such as Will Robinson, Peg Leg Taylor, Bud Bassett, Henry Van Dyke, Chester Ross, Jake Mays, O.B. Mann, John Supplesocks, Fatty, Jack Scott, Lee Mabel, John Bowman, and W.S. Weaver armed themselves and gathered at his hotel in preparation for the events. By June 6, according to the Associated Press, a Citizens Public Safety Committee comprising 250 white men had been formed. Their mission was to safeguard the city and quell any further disturbances. On that day, a white man was fatally shot by a National Guardsman after he disregarded orders to halt. Governor James B. A. Robertson visited Tulsa during the riot to restore order. Before returning to the capital, he ordered an inquiry into the events, particularly focusing on the city and sheriff's office. He directed the empaneling of a grand jury, which was set to commence its investigation on June 8 under Judge Valjean Biddison's supervision. The jury selection process was completed by June 9, with expectations that the state attorney general would summon numerous witnesses, both black and white, given the scale of the riot. State Attorney General Sergeant Prentice Freeling spearheaded the investigation, conducting hearings over a span of 12 days. Ultimately, the all-white jury attributed the riot to black mobs while critiquing law enforcement for failing to prevent the violence. The court heard a total of 27 cases and indicted over 85 individuals, yet no convictions were secured for deaths, injuries, or property damage. On June 3, a gathering of more than 1,000 businessmen and civic leaders convened, deciding to establish a committee to raise funds and aid in the reconstruction of Greenwood. Judge Loyal J. Martin, a former Tulsa mayor, was selected as the committee chair. Addressing the assembly, he declared, "Tulsa can only redeem herself from the country-wide shame and humiliation into which she is today plunged by complete restitution and rehabilitation of the destroyed Black Belt. The rest of the United States must know that the true citizenship of Tulsa mourns this unspeakable crime and will make reparations, to the fullest extent possible, down to the last penny." During the winter of 1921-1922, many black families lived in tents while rebuilding efforts progressed. Charles Page received accolades for his philanthropic support of destitute black residents in the aftermath of the riot. Influential white developers successfully lobbied the city to enact a fire ordinance aimed at preventing many black residents from rebuilding in Greenwood. Their agenda was to redevelop Greenwood for commercial and industrial use, pushing black residents to the outskirts of the city. This ordinance was challenged and appealed to the Oklahoma Supreme Court by Buck Colbert Franklin, resulting in a ruling of unconstitutionality. Despite promises, adequate funding for black residents' reconstruction efforts never materialized, leading to significant challenges in their rebuilding endeavors. Willows, the Red Cross regional director, noted these difficulties in his report, citing slow progress initially in aiding the refugees. The fire code was ostensibly implemented to prevent future tragedies by prohibiting the construction of wooden frame houses to replace those lost. Initially, a compromise allowed temporary wooden structures while adhering to the more stringent fire code for permanent construction. However, this agreement was quickly breached as residents began erecting full-sized wooden homes within 2 weeks, prompting a 2-month delay until a court decision reinstated the previous fire code. Willows criticized Tulsa officials for hindering reconstruction efforts, citing their interference with the Public Welfare Committee, rezoning plans for the burned area as industrial, and the construction of a Union Station without regard for displaced residents. He further criticized the dissolution of the Public Welfare Committee in favor of the Reconstruction Committee, which failed to formulate a cohesive plan, delaying residents' ability to begin reconstruction for several months. Despite the Red Cross's earnest efforts to aid in Greenwood's reconstruction, the district's current layout and its surrounding neighborhoods have been significantly altered. The extensive redevelopment led by individuals unconnected to the neighborhood before the riot serves as evidence of the limited success of the Red Cross's relief efforts. At the time of the riot, Tulsa's primary industries included banking, Bach Financial Corporation, administrative services, Penwell, Oklahoma Natural Gas Company, and petroleum engineering, Skelly Oil, which collectively earned Tulsa the moniker Oil Capital of the World. Joshua Cosden, credited as a city founder, erected Tulsa's tallest building, the Cosden Building. The Manhattan Construction Company, headquartered in Tulsa, oversaw the construction of both the Cosden Building and Union Depot. Francis Rooney, the great-grandson and beneficiary of Manhattan Construction Company founder Lawrence H. Rooney's estate, continues to uphold his legacy. City planners viewed the devastating fire that razed Greenwood's homes and businesses as an opportunity to advance their urban development goals, showing scant regard for the affected residents' welfare. Plans swiftly materialized to rezone the burned area for industrial purposes. The Tulsa Daily World reported that the mayor and city commissioners believed a large industrial section would be desirable in promoting greater segregation between Negroes and whites. The Reconstruction Committee convened a meeting to present their proposal to community leaders and stakeholders, including figures like O.W. Gurley, Reverend H.T.F. Johnson, and Barney Cleaver. According to reports, all participants endorsed the redevelopment plan for the burned district as an industrial zone and expressed support for the proposed Union Station project. No dissenting voices were heard, the article noted, with plans for a subsequent meeting at First Baptist Church. The Black Dispatch detailed the subsequent meeting at First Baptist Church, where the Reconstruction Committee intended for black landowners to transfer their properties to a holding company managed by black representatives on behalf of the city. These properties would then be handed over to a white appraisal committee, which would compensate residents based on industrial zoned values before rezoning. Professor J.W. Hughes staunchly opposed this proposition before the White Reconstruction Committee, coining a rallying cry that would resonate within the community: "I'm going to hold what I have until I get what I've lost." Construction of the Tulsa Union Depot, a significant central rail hub linking 3 major railroads, commenced in Greenwood less than 2 years after the riot. Before the riot, efforts were already underway to build a smaller rail hub nearby. However, in the aftermath of the riot, the land where homes and businesses had been destroyed by fires became available, leading to the decision to expand and relocate the train depot to Greenwood, positioning it closer to the city center. Chief Chuck Jordan of the Tulsa Police Department lamented, "Back then, they just didn't do their job." Mary E. Jones Parrish, a black resident of Tulsa, attributed the lawlessness in Oklahoma in 1922 to the profitable alliance of politics and vice or professional crime, suggesting it fueled the unrest. Clark, a respected Oklahoma historian and law professor, explored the era's lawlessness in his doctoral dissertation, particularly how it contributed to the resurgence of the Second Ku Klux Klan, highlighting the critical need for robust law enforcement and an effective judiciary. Chief of Police John A. Gustafson faced a comprehensive investigation that commenced on June 6, 1921. He was accused of a range of offenses, including neglecting to enforce prohibition and anti-prostitution laws, running an operation that laundered stolen automobiles, allowing known criminals to evade justice in exchange for rewards, misappropriating vehicles for personal use or sale, operating a fraudulent detective agency billed to the city, failing to enforce firearm regulations, and failing to act during the riots. Numerous letters received by the Oklahoma Attorney General alleged collusion between members of the police force and the justice system to intimidate witnesses in corruption trials stemming from grand jury investigations. The public demanded the Attorney General's involvement, but due to budget constraints, an assistant suggested the citizens of Tulsa elect new officers instead. Gustafson had a history of fraud predating his tenure with the Tulsa Police Department. His former partner in the detective agency, Phil Kirk, had been convicted of blackmail. The agency had billed the police department extensively, and investigators found evidence of blackmail letters sent to community members. In one disturbing case, involving the repeated rape of an 11-year-old girl who became pregnant, no prosecution occurred. Instead, a blackhand letter was sent. Gustafson was convicted on July 30, 1921, on 2 counts: negligence for failing to quell the riot, leading to his dismissal from the police force, and conspiracy for releasing automobile thieves and collecting rewards, resulting in a jail sentence. 3 days following the massacre, President Warren G. Harding addressed the all-black Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, emphasizing national unity. Despite the demagogues, the idea of our oneness as Americans has risen superior to every appeal to mere class and group. And so, I wish it might be in this matter of our national problem of races. He directly referenced the events in Tulsa, expressing hope that, in the soberness, the fairness, and the justice of this country, we never see another spectacle like it. Despite the severity of the violence, there were no convictions related to the charges stemming from the massacre. For decades, there was a widespread silence about the terror, violence, and losses inflicted during the event. The riot was notably absent from local, state, and national histories, with little mention in history books, classrooms, or private conversations. The Tulsa Tribune's features like 15 years ago today, or 25 years ago today, overlooked the event, and a 2017 report on the history of the Tulsa Fire Department made no reference to the 1921 massacre. Efforts were made by several individuals to document the events, gather photographs, and compile records of the deceased and injured. Mary Elizabeth Jones Parrish, a young black teacher and journalist from Rochester, New York, was commissioned by the Interracial Commission to document the riot. As a survivor, she chronicled her experiences, collected testimonies, gathered photographs, and compiled a partial roster of property losses within the African American community. In 1922, she published Events of the Tulsa Disaster, which became the first book about the riot. The first academic account, a master's thesis by World War II veteran Lauren L. Gill in 1946, was confined to the University of Tulsa. In 1971, a small group of survivors gathered for a memorial service at Mount Zion Baptist Church, attended by both black and white community members. Around the same time, the Tulsa Chamber of Commerce considered commemorating the riot but chose not to publish accounts and photos gathered by Ed Wheeler, a radio history program host. Wheeler's article, Profile of a Race Riot, was eventually published in Impact magazine, targeted at black audiences, yet remained largely unknown among Tulsa's white residents. During the early 1970s, Mozella Franklin Jones and Henry C. Whitlow Jr., a history teacher at Booker T. Washington High School, played pivotal roles in desegregating the Tulsa Historical Society and organizing the first major exhibition on the history of African Americans in Tulsa. Jones established the first collection of massacre photographs accessible to the public at the Tulsa Historical Society. Despite facing pressure, particularly from the white community, to keep silent, Jones collaborated with Ruth Sigler Avery, a white woman also committed to publicizing accounts of the riot. Their efforts helped bring greater awareness to the historical significance and impact of the Tulsa Race Massacre. The Tulsa Massacre resulted in an estimated loss of 150 to 300 lives, with over 800 people seriously injured, and many others experiencing profound and enduring impacts on their lives. In 1996, nearing the 75th anniversary of the riot, the Oklahoma State Legislature authorized a commission to investigate the Tulsa Race Riot. This commission was tasked with studying and preparing a comprehensive historical account of the events. The initiative garnered broad bipartisan support across political lines. Originally named the Tulsa Race Riot Commission, the name was later changed in November 2018 to the Tulsa Race Massacre Commission. The commission conducted extensive interviews and hearings to meticulously document the causes and aftermath of the tragedy. On February 21, 2001, the commission issued its final report, which included recommendations for significant restitution to the black residents affected by the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. These recommendations prioritized 1. Direct payment of reparations to survivors of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. 2. Direct payment of reparations to descendants of the survivors. 3. Creation of a scholarship fund for students impacted by the Tulsa Race Massacre. 4. Establishment of an economic development enterprise zone in the historic Greenwood district. 5. Construction of a memorial for the reinterment of the victims' remains from the Tulsa Race Massacre. The Tulsa Race Massacre Commission coordinated non-invasive archaeological surveys at New Block Park, Oaklawn Cemetery, and Booker T. Washington Cemetery, identified as potential locations for mass graves of black victims of the violence. Oral histories and other sources indicated that white perpetrators likely buried victims at New Block Park and Oaklawn Cemetery, while black community members were believed to have buried victims at Booker T. Washington Cemetery after the riots subsided. Due to its distance from downtown, Washington Cemetery was speculated to house victims who succumbed to their injuries after the initial violence. Surveys of these sites were conducted in 1997 and 1998, but despite initial hopes, no conclusive evidence of mass graves was found. In 1999, an eyewitness account alleging the burial of victims at Oaklawn Cemetery prompted further investigation with enhanced equipment. However, the subsequent expert report presented to the Commission in December 2000 concluded that claims of mass graves at Oaklawn Cemetery, Washington Cemetery, and New Block Park could not be substantiated. What appeared to be promising sites at Washington Cemetery and New Block Park turned out to be natural features, an old basement and a layer of clay, respectively. The theory that victims' bodies were incinerated in the city's incinerator was also dismissed due to logistical constraints and capacity limitations. In anticipation of the massacre's 100th anniversary, state archaeologists used ground-penetrating radar to scan Oaklawn Cemetery for rumored mass graves. Tulsa Mayor G.T. Bynum likened the effort to a murder investigation. Following public input, officials from the Oklahoma Archaeological Survey employed 3 different subsurface scanning techniques at New Block Park, Oaklawn Cemetery, and an area known as the Canes along the Arkansas River. Subsequently, the Oklahoma Archaeological Survey announced the cessation of search efforts at New Block Park after no evidence of graves was found. On December 17, 2019, a team of forensic archaeologists reported anomalies consistent with human-dug pits beneath the ground at Oaklawn Cemetery and near the Interstate 244 bridge crossing the Arkansas River. These anomalies were identified as potential mass graves, prompting plans for further radar surveys and physical excavations. Permission for limited excavations was secured from the city, with excavation work scheduled to begin in April 2020. While initial digs in suspected areas of Oaklawn Cemetery in July 2020 did not yield human remains, researchers affirmed their commitment to respectful treatment should any remains be discovered during subsequent excavations. On October 21, 2020, a forensic team announced the discovery of 11 coffins in Oaklawn Cemetery, with records and research suggesting that up to 18 victims may be found. Further investigation is required to confirm if these coffins contain the remains of massacre victims. Carrie Stackelbeck, a state archaeologist, emphasized that the remains would not be disturbed until they could be properly excavated to prevent deterioration. She confirmed that the site where the coffins were discovered constitutes a mass grave, expressing confidence that it is one of the sought-after locations, yet cautioning that no human remains beyond those encountered had been exposed. The team planned to conduct the exhumation in June 2021, with forensic anthropologist Phoebe Stubblefield scheduled to analyze the remains to determine if they belonged to victims of the 1921 massacre. In June 2021, as scientists resumed their work, they uncovered a total of 35 coffins from the mass grave. 19 sets of human remains were taken to an on-site science laboratory, where preliminary analyses were completed on 9 of them. In September 2023, Stackelbeck reported that a comprehensive survey identified 59 grave sites, including 57 previously unknown ones. 7 sets of remains were recovered, each found in simple wooden boxes. In March 2001, each of the 118 surviving known survivors of the riot, the youngest of whom was 85 years old at the time, received a gold-plated medal bearing the state seal, approved by bipartisan state leaders. Following this, on April 7, 2001, the Tulsa Reparations Coalition, sponsored by the Center for Racial Justice, Inc., was established to seek restitution for the damages suffered by Tulsa's black community, as recommended by the Oklahoma Commission. On June 1, 2001, Governor Frank Keating signed the 1921 Tulsa Race Riot Reconciliation Act into law. While the act officially acknowledged the event, it did not provide substantial reparations to the victims or their descendants, contrary to the Commission's recommendation in its riot report. The act included the following provisions: over 300 college scholarships for descendants of Greenwood residents. Establishment of a memorial to honor those who died in the riot. This memorial, featuring statues, was dedicated as John Hope Franklin Reconciliation Park on October 27, 2010, named after the distinguished African American historian from Tulsa. Economic development initiatives in the Greenwood district. In February 2003, 5 survivors, represented by a legal team including Johnny Cochran and Charles Ogletree, filed a lawsuit against the city of Tulsa and the state of Oklahoma based on the findings of the 2001 report. Ogletree argued that the state and city had an obligation to compensate the victims and their families, as outlined in the Commission's report. However, the federal district and appellate courts dismissed the suit, citing that a recommendation did not constitute an admitted obligation, and noting that the statute of limitations for the 80-year-old case had expired. Oklahoma law requires civil rights cases to be filed within 2 years of the event, which precluded further legal action. As a result, the courts did not rule on the substantive issues, and the Supreme Court of the United States declined to hear the appeal. In April 2007, Ogletree appealed to the U.S. Congress to pass a bill extending the statute of limitations for such cases, citing the state and city's responsibility for the destruction and the long suppression of information regarding it. The bill, introduced by John Conyers of Michigan, was reviewed by the House Judiciary Committee but did not pass due to concerns about ex post facto legislation. In 2010, a park was established in the Greenwood area to honor the victims of the riot. Named in October 2010, the park commemorates noted historian John Hope Franklin, a Tulsa native renowned for his studies on Southern history. Sculpted by Ed Dwight, the park features 3 statues symbolizing hostility, humiliation, and hope. In 2020, Oklahoma school districts were provided with a comprehensive curriculum about the event. On May 29, 2020, on the eve of the 99th anniversary of the event and coinciding with the onset of the George Floyd protests, Human Rights Watch released a report titled, "The Case for Reparations in Tulsa, Oklahoma: A Human Rights Argument, Advocating for Reparations to Survivors and Descendants of the Violence." The report highlighted persistent economic impacts such as high poverty rates and lower life expectancies in North Tulsa. Concurrently, several documentary projects were announced for release on the 100th anniversary of the event, including Black Wall Street by Dream Hampton and another documentary by Salima Karoma. In September 2020, Viola Fletcher, a 105-year-old survivor of the massacre, along with 2 other survivors, filed a lawsuit against the city seeking reparations for damages inflicted on Tulsa's black businesses. In 2021, Oklahoma librarians successfully lobbied the Library of Congress to change the official subject headings related to the event from riot to massacre, acknowledging its historical significance. On May 19, 2021, survivors Viola Fletcher, then 107 years old, her 100-year-old brother Hughes Van Ellis, and 106-year-old Leslie Benningfield Randall testified before a House Judiciary Subcommittee about their experiences during the massacre and their reparations lawsuit. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice in July 2023, but their lawyers appealed this decision to the Oklahoma Supreme Court in November 2023. On June 12, 2024, the Oklahoma Supreme Court upheld the dismissal of the lawsuit, thereby bringing the legal proceedings to a close. The court ruled that while the grievances raised by the plaintiffs were valid, Oklahoma's public nuisance statute did not apply in this case. This decision came amidst ongoing resolutions in the U.S. House and Senate Judiciary Committees seeking federal recognition of the centennial of the massacre on May 31 and June 1, coinciding with the testimony provided by the 3 survivors. The Tulsa Historical Society and Museum offers a freely accessible virtual exhibit on the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921, available throughout the day. This online presentation features a wealth of exclusive photos, audio recordings, documents, and resources. Additionally, a traveling exhibit comprising 4 panels about the Tulsa Race Massacre circulates within the Tulsa metropolitan area, aimed at community education. Today, remnants of Black Wall Street can still be found within Tulsa's historical Greenwood district. Following the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921, it took approximately a decade to reconstruct this area. The historic Vernon AIM Church stands as the sole remaining building from the original structures impacted by the massacre. The residents of Greenwood continue to honor the memory of the Tulsa Race Massacre, maintaining numerous memorials throughout the community that pay homage to what was once Black Wall Street. Ongoing investigations in the Greenwood district seek to uncover more unmarked graves and identify additional victims of this tragic event.